All right, Proverbs 9 this evening. Proverbs 9. Well, we conclude the extended prologue of Proverbs. Remember, chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs really just build the foundation. They establish the foundation of this book. And we don't get to the quote-unquote Proverbs until chapter 10. You can see that, chapter 10, verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. There have been a few statements of wisdom or images of wisdom up until this point, but chapter 9 really gives us the launching pad of it's like we're at the end of the runway, okay? It's like Proverbs has been working towards the end of the runway from chapters 1 through 9. And then chapter 9 is right where the wheels take off, and then we begin the flight through the Proverbs of Solomon, these statements of wisdom. This is the conclusion of the introduction, if you want to say it that way, all right? And we are given one more reminder. The line is drawn in the sand, one more reminder of these two women that we have seen, or at least forms of these women. We've seen Lady Wisdom multiple times, chapter 1, chapter 3, chapter 5, and then in chapter 8. And then we've seen Lady Folly several times. We've seen Lady Folly in chapter 1, and then we've seen the Lady Folly, the adulteress, chapter 5 and chapter 7. And we're given one more reminder of these two women, these two profiles, these two poetic profiles, if you want to think about it that way. And so the image of folly and wisdom is once again personified by these ladies, by these literary characters, these poetic characters, and these serve as this final contrast serves as the introduction to the Proverbs. The way that chapters 10 and following will structure is not going to be the way that we have been going, okay? We're going to be all over the place, chapters 10 and following, because it's kind of how you have to look at the Proverbs. And it's very outside my personality, all right? Proverbs is going to stretch me. Proverbs does stretch me. If you want to think about it this way, my mind works like a rifle. I shoot straight. I'm hitting the target. Proverbs shoots like a shotgun. It's all over the place. Okay, it sprays all these different concepts, and so you have to kind of, unless you're shooting a slug, you get my point. You have to look at all of the spray. You have to look at all of the facets and the aspects. And so, if your brain tends to be a little more all over the place, you might really enjoy Proverbs. All right, and so that's what we're going to get to. But chapter 9, we're gonna conclude our introduction. We're gonna get to the end of the runway here together. So you can see clearly the structure here. Look with me, chapter 9, verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. So we have the character of Lady Wisdom. And then look with me at verse 13. The woman Folly is loud. So we have the woman Folly, all right? So let's look at the way of wisdom first, or Lady Wisdom. And we're given different images to express some of the same concepts. Wisdom has built her house. She has sown her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. So I want to know a few things about Lady Wisdom here, all right? We note, first of all, something that we've already seen about her multiple times. We note the publicity of her nature, or of her message, the publicity of her message. She's built her house, and she sends out her message. Now, her message is a message of wisdom, and so she's going to send out these women, her, almost like her pupils, her disciples, to go and call people back to her house so that they can hear the message of wisdom. So she has a public message. But we actually get an idea in this poetic imagery of some of the prosperity of Lady Wisdom, the prosperity of Lady Wisdom. And when I say prosperity, you shouldn't in your mind immediately think, okay, wisdom is the opportunity to get rich. Maybe think back to chapter 1, where we did talk about how wisdom beautifies a person, wisdom brings prosperity, but it's spiritual prosperity through the protection of God. It's spiritual prosperity through the protection of God. It's not that God is my means to receive, like He's a divine vending machine where I just put in enough and I get out what I want. But it's that God is protecting me and beautifying my life with His mind and His morality, His wisdom. And when God beautifies our life, there is a sense of spiritual prosperity. Psalm 1, everything that the blessed and happy man does prospers. His leaf does not wither. In other words, good is produced in his life. Even if there's difficulty in the field, even if there's difficulty in the life, even if sickness comes, wisdom beautifies the life through God's mind and His morality. And you can see that prosperity here, the publicity and the prosperity. Wisdom has built her house. She's sown her 7 pillars. 7 Old Testament term often. It doesn't always. Sometimes people, you look at numbers in the Bible and they come up with weird ideas. But sometimes, often in the Old Testament, and regularly in Proverbs, 7 is a complete number. It's a number of completion. So we get the idea that this is a prosperous house. This is a good house. It's probably a large house. A 7-pillared house is a well-fortified, well-protected, and well-constructed, and probably pretty big house. She is inviting people into the prosperity that God has given her. She's slaughtered her beasts. She's mixed her own wine. I love the idea. I love the idea that Lady Wisdom here is doing the work. Okay, so Proverbs 31. The virtuous woman. Sometimes is a passage that is I think unfortunately used to create a almost an impossible standard on women, but certainly gives principles. I've also heard Proverbs 31 used and applied like the woman's supposed to stay home. Proverbs 31, right? The Proverbs 31 woman's supposed to stay home. Well, the Proverbs 31 woman works in Proverbs 31. She goes out into the market and she sells and the stuff that she's worked on at home, and then she supports her family. And so it's not a straight line to just the Proverbs 31 woman works at home. Here, Lady Wisdom slaughtered her beast and mixed her wine. She's butchering the animals. She's a hard worker. They're her beasts. She's been prosperous enough to build her own field and go out and get her own animals. Now, I'm not advocating for like the homesteading lifestyle, all right? That's not what I'm saying. This is what we're saying we should do. But certainly there's this idea of hard work related to the woman. She's not just, Lady Wisdom has not just sat back and prayed that God would bring her everything she desired, and God just magically gave it to her. There was work involved here. Now, obviously, this is not a real person, okay? Unlike who Proverbs 31 is probably specifically referring to somebody. But this is Lady Wisdom, the image of Lady Wisdom. She set her table. She's provided the food, and she's prepared the food, and she's put out the food. And then she sent out her young women, given the idea that she has disciples, she has pupils, she has people following her. She's teaching young women. And they're going out, and what are they doing? They're inviting people into her home. You come out, you dine with us. You enjoy the wine that's been mixed and the meat that's been prepared and the bread that's been baked. Come eat of my bread, drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight. So verse 6 gives us the idea that there's an invitation to more than just the food that she has prepared, but she's inviting people into her lifestyle. And what is her lifestyle? Well, she's the woman of wisdom. So she's inviting people, come eat of my bread. Bread here is the analogy for the spiritual sustenance that she provides. And we're going to see later The way that we know that is because Lady Folly also provides bread. And there, it's stolen bread that seems sweet but doesn't actually nourish you. So the bread here is not just referring to the prosperity of the table, it's referring to the spirituality of the person. So come eat of the spiritual nourishment that I give. And I hopefully at this point, your biblical alarm bells are going off. And what does that sound like? Well, that sounds like Jesus of Nazareth saying, I am the bread of life. And if you eat of the bread of life, if you believe and you eat of the bread of life, you won't hunger, you'll know nourishment, you will receive life. This idea of spiritual nourishment used in physical terms, of physical sustenance, is something we see carried all the way through the Scriptures, and Christ himself regularly utilizes. Obviously, John brings this out profoundly. Come, eat the bread and drink the wine that I have mixed, and leave your simple ways and live. In other words, stop being stupid, turn, repent, and live and walk in the way of insight. And then what the writer's going to do is he's going to include this almost in verses 7 through 12 in context of the way of Lady Wisdom. He's going to include this commentary on how wise people respond to rebuke. Why? Because here the image is then going to be applied to how wise people receive truth. So on the heels of leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight, we're going to be given some greater understanding of how we walk in the way of insight. Well, we walk in the way of insight and we turn from our simple ways by receiving the rebuke that naturally accompanies wisdom. It's almost like the technical term is inclusio, something that's included in what's going on in the greater context. It's almost like we're given a sub-commentary on how we should respond to the Lady Wisdom leading us into Lady Folly. It's almost like he's giving his own commentary on these images between Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There it is. And the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and your years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. So let's just work through this text. So Lady Folly, and then this commentary, or Lady Wisdom, and this commentary, and then Lady Folly. Whoever corrects a scoffer, remember scoffer is the big bad, the ultimate bad guy in Proverbs. He's advanced beyond the point of just being dumb. He's past the simpleton. He's past the stupid person. He is past the point of no return. He's gone after the way of sin and folly to the extent that there's a very dark picture. If you correct a scoffer, you get yourself abuse. And he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. So the idea is that wisdom given to one who's already made up their mind that they don't want wisdom, that their lifestyle is a way of folly. To use Jesus' terminology, it's like casting pearls before swine. It means nothing to them. It's wasted energy, it's wasted words. It's casting seeds on carpet. It's not going to root. Nothing's going to happen. In fact, it may actually go poorly for you. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse. Have you ever, with good intentions, that you knew before the Lord were good intentions, attempted to help somebody, and you walked away going, man, I wish I didn't do that? What a waste of time. Here, the idea is that it's just a waste of everybody's time. It's not worth it. It may actually cause you more damage than that person any good. I can think of one time in my life where I was in college and I said something to an individual. I was in a position of, I was an RA at college, and some people don't like RAs. And I said something to a guy, really well-meaning, and I believed I had a good relationship with him, well enough to say this to him. And months later, and this guy didn't act different, but months later, I was hearing things about myself from other people. And it's like, well, that's not true. I don't know where you heard that. But, you know what happened. I corrected this guy, and it bothered him, and so he started saying things that are untrue. It incurred injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. And this is where we have to be careful, because I think even the stubbornness that causes us to reject rebuke exists, or at least the potential of it exists in all of us, whether we're scoffers or not. Certainly it exists in the scoffer. But if a loving, well-meaning brother or sister at a good time and in a good way corrected you, would you love that brother? Would you be drawn to that sister? Would you accept that? Would I? And so maybe the spirit of stubbornness exists in us, and what is characteristic of a scoffer should not even be exceptional in us. In other words, not only should it not be normal about us, it shouldn't be rare in us. It should never happen. There should be no hints of the scoffer in us at all, if we're truly redeemed. So when you're reproved, are you drawn in love to that individual? Are you drawn in love to that individual because you know what they're saying is true? Or do you dig in your heels in stubbornness because you know what they're saying is true and you'd rather just not admit it? I'm reminded of a line by a great and wise wizard in the realm of fantasy. He says, people are much more likely to forgive you for being wrong than for being right. And the idea is people tend to be really stubborn when they know they're wrong. Do you? Am I? Or is our first response to go, Pastor Fisher used to say this to me all the time, with every criticism, you need to first ask yourself, is any of this true? With every criticism, you need to first ask yourself, is any of this true? None of it may be true. Some people just want to criticize. But there might be 0.5% of it that is, 10% of it that is, 15% of it that is, enough to pay attention to. Reprove a scoffer, he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, he will love you. And this means that if this is the attitude of a scoffer, and we are characteristically opposed to correction, it reveals not only spiritual stubbornness, it reveals the very thing that we refuse to admit: foolishness. Semblances, a hint, or maybe just outright foolishness. God is sanctifying us, which means slowly He is purifying the foolishness right out of us. And so we should not be surprised when we reveal elements of that foolish man, that foolish woman. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. A wise person knows they need to grow in wisdom. A wise person welcomes instruction. I think I said this recently. We have a line in our home that we've been using a lot lately. All of our children, every parent thinks their child is the smartest kid in the world, but all of our children have very high maintenance minds. I say high maintenance on purpose. And we have one who's very, very, very much like me. And my dad laughs at me because it's justice, right? And the way that this child is like me is a sentence can be said, and we can think about 20 different ways to criticize that one sentence and find that one word to pick apart and find just how that sentence can be used to benefit us in some way, right? So if there's a rule that's given, it's like, well, what if, or but, or maybe. And so the line that we've been using a lot in our house is don't listen to speak, listen to listen. Because maybe you have a child like this, or you've had a child like this. As you're speaking, you can see them formulating their response, and you can't even get the words out before the response is there. Don't listen to speak. Listen to listen. That's the heart of a disciple. I'm not listening with the intention of flipping this so that it benefits me in some way, so that I can get the candy, right? Or I can get the cookie, or I can have the extra snack, or whatever it becomes for us adults. But listen because it's the right thing to do and accept the answer. And so when the word comes to you and the Lord is teaching you, are you listening to listen? Or do you have lots of self-justifications back to the Lord? Or are you thinking about how you can criticize what the Word says or readjust what the Word says so that somehow it doesn't present you in a sinful light or a less fortunate light or whatever, and you want to get something from Him? Wise people know they need to be wiser. Disciples know they need to learn. And so when we come to the Word, do we listen to listen? Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. And then just to make sure we understand, the definition is given so that we're rightly rooted in our understanding of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Actually, the way that this proverb is set up is if you count the lines down to the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the first line of verse 12, verse 10, if you count the lines before and after, this line is directly centered in the middle. Similarly to Psalm 23, I don't know if you're familiar with how Psalm 23 works, but if you count the lines before and after, you end up with you end up exactly at "You are with me, and your rod and your staff comfort me." And the point of Psalm 23 is the shepherding presence of God. And so actually the poetry is written so that the lines direct you to the primary emphasis. And so Proverbs here, we're structured to work towards the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. Why? Because if we get this wrong, we get it all wrong. We don't have the right establishment of wisdom. We don't have the right definition of wisdom. And the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and your years will be added to life. Now Lady Wisdom is speaking again. I will give you life. I will give you nourishment. If you are wise for yourself. Verse 12 is so sad and scary. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. Spiritual pride, amongst the many things that it brings into our life, it brings loneliness. It brings isolation. Why? We have to do it ourselves, don't we? We have to figure it out on our own. We have to do it on our own. We have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we have to do it our own way. This is countercultural to the idea of faith in God. Faith in God has always occurred in community. God himself has always functioned in community. Did you realize that? God has always God is a community. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. God has always functioned in relationship. There's nothing in God's plan relating to his people that he intends to be completely isolated or independent. I actually think, pastoral aside here, I actually think that's why a lot of quote-unquote Christians are scared of the church. They want to be Christian and they want to have a relationship with Jesus, maybe. Well, they want to go to heaven. They don't want to go to hell. But as soon as you start to push them to go to church, it's like the deeper I get into this, the more people know me. And then that scares them. But God has functioned in Trinity, his essence, his relational nature, the community that is God. And then he establishes a people, Israel. And then that people leads us into the New Testament, and then we understand that there are blessings transferred into the church, or at least hinted at in the church, and then we see culminate in the church around Christ uniting a people to himself, and then Israel, his people, Old Testament, and this is my theology, it's not everybody's, it's one of the primary theologies, it's going to be restored again. And so he has a plan, he still has a plan for Israel, the salvation of all Israel, Romans 9 through 11. And then ultimately, it leads absolutely to one unified people, every tribe and tongue and nation, new heavens and new earth. It's scoffers who want to live their life outside community, characteristically, who want to live their life outside community. Or at least the underlying heart of one. And we're back to Lady Folly. I don't know why, but I was studying, I do know why. I was studying Lady Folly this week, and I couldn't get Evil Woman out of my head by, what is that band? Anyway, I couldn't get Evil Woman out of my head. It's who she is, man. Is it ELO, right? Anyway, that was what was humming all week long. So when I come to Proverbs 9, it's what I think of, evil woman. The way of folly is loud. She's seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house and takes a seat in the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here, and to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. All right, so let's work through this. The way of folly is loud. We have some comparisons. Who is doing the invitation work for Lady Wisdom? Well, her pupils are, her disciples are, the young woman that she has cultivated. They're doing the inviting work. She's not needing to do this on her own. Why? Because she's given life to people enough to the extent that they will invite people for her. She has disciples that they want to bring people into this way of life. The woman of folly is loud. She's by herself, sitting at the door of her house, trying to get people to come in. And we kind of get we shouldn't be surprised that she's doing this by herself, because we've just been told that the way of the scoffer is lonely. Verse 12, right? So she sits at the door of her house by herself. She doesn't have people that have come into the goodness and prosperity of her life that can invite other people into that prosperity. And I don't want to get political with this, but I do think we could get cultural. It doesn't take long to recognize that if you look at culture and you look at the things that people unite around that aren't Christ, they're not life-giving. They're not life-giving. And the disciples that they create are destructive. The followers that they produce don't give life. They lead people on the way of folly, and they lead people to the way of death. She's seductive. Elsewhere, that word is also translated, she herself is full of simplicity. In other words, she's dumb. This is a word that can be translated either way based on implication. And she knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house, takes a seat in the highest place of the town. Again, she's making herself public, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. And what's her message? Compared to the message of Lady Wisdom, who's calling people into her life of prosperity and morality and true pleasantness, she's calling people into her life of stupidity and her life of simplicity. Whoever's simple, let him turn and hear. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet and bread is eaten in secret places. So what's the brand? What's the hook for Lady Wisdom? I can offer you life. What's the hook for Lady Folly? If you're stupid, this is the place for you. Come join me. Now, maybe you can think of some people that's kind of the house they belong in. But we need to pray that God grows them out of that. And you can see, this is where you really need to press into the imagery. This is one of the things that's beautiful about Proverbs and some of these other poetic books. We don't quite get imagery like this. Sometimes you get it in the prophets and other genres. But much like in Proverbs 7, do you remember how in Proverbs 7 ended? You can go back there. The way of her house is the way to Sheol, going down the chambers of death. It's like literally the adulteress is taking you down the stairs into hell. Do you remember that? We got that very graphic, dark image from Proverbs 7. Well, we have the same idea here. But here, the house and the table are compared, are contrasted. The house of the way of wisdom, it's like it's beautiful, it's big, it's prosperous. There's a full spread on the table. I mean, we're talking the kind of place you want to come and you can sit down, you can eat, and you can receive life. And she's got people going out talking about how great her life is and how great her house is and how great her way of life is, compared to Lady Folly, and her house is small. She sits at the door. It's this rundown place. And when she gets you inside, the steps go down, they don't go up. There's no progress here. Look at the table. I said that the themes are contrasted by the house and the table. What's the table in Lady Wisdom? Newly mixed wine, freshly killed beasts. I mean, I'm there for a freshly killed beast, right? Let's get some meat. The bread is freshly baked. She's made it. She's made it herself. She's done the work. I mean, and I don't think it's just me. I mean, I know I'm a guy, and we do love meat and bread, right? But it's not just me. Like, have you ever? I mean, you come home from a long day, and you can smell some meat roasting and some fresh bread. I mean, That's heaven, brother, right? You go to Texas Roadhouse and you smell the rolls and the food's good. The vibe's like loud. My kids love Texas Roadhouse because it's all loud and, there's lights and right. But man, you smell those rolls and you get that meat. Look at her table. Stolen water is sweet. She didn't prepare it. She stole it. She didn't do the work. Stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant. I mean, what a lame invitation. I mean, you've got Texas Roadhouse rolls and steak over here, but over here we've got water, and we've got bread that you can eat by yourself that didn't even belong to you. It's garbage food. It's superficially satisfying. She's trying to pitch us like it's a good meal. You see that? Water's sweet. Bread is pleasant. Why? Because we learned back in chapter 7 that one of the functions of the evil woman is that she's going to try to make sin look good. But he does not know that the dead are there. Wow, what an image. It's like you go in and you can, again, picture the poetry here. He goes in and he's got his cup of water that she's promised him is sweet, and he's got his little loaf of bread. And he's surrounded by dead people. He's eating in a den of ghosts. That her guests are in the depths of Sheol. It's stairs that go down but don't go up. Once again, just like Proverbs 7, we end with a dark picture. I don't know how well you know Charles Dickens' book, The Christmas Carol. We're coming up on it. And this scene actually isn't represented in all of them. If you really want a thorough exposition of which Christmas carols are the best, you should talk to my dad. Okay, I think it's the most remade movie. There's something like 55 renditions of it. I mean, there's tons of them. Muppet Christmas Carol is the best. But anyway, this scene's not represented in all of them, but there's a part where the animated one is really good, the animated one that came out a few years ago. There's a part right before, after Marley tells Scrooge what's going to happen that night, there's a part where he takes him over to the window. I don't know if you know this part or if you know the story. And he tells him to look out the window, and Scrooge sees all of these spirits, all of these ghosts, trying to help people, but they can't. Their time's passed. And so like his eyes are turned on to all of these ghosts. And I just wonder if the fool sitting there, surrounded by the dead with his dinky cup of water and his dinky loaf of bread, knowing that across town there's a feast and Lady Wisdom has a spread, and she's inviting people into prosperity, and she's inviting people into peace, true prosperity and true peace. If his eyes could just be turned to the ghosts around him and to the death around him, if he'd get out of there. He doesn't know that our guests are in hell. It's kind of a scary story, again, that Solomon tells his sons. What's a scary story that we need and then we need to be reminded of? It's a scary story that we should tell our sons. We should tell our kids. Don't go the way of folly. That way lies madness. I mean, truly, this is Solomon talking to his son, saying, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Stay away from that path. Stay away from her house. That's death. That's destruction. So fear the Lord and walk in the way of wisdom. Live in the community. Listen to one of those women who represents Lady Wisdom, those disciples coming out saying, come meet my master. Come meet the hostess. She wants you to know this life. She wants you to know her morality. She wants you to know her mind. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And learn knowledge of the Holy One. It will give you insight, and your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. And so may God at every stage and age of our life cause us to humbly recognize our need to grow in wisdom, and give us a proportionate and healthy fear of folly. In the coming chapters, we're going to see clearly what it looks like when we walk the way of wisdom, when we follow after Lady Wisdom, and we reject Lady Folly. So next week, we begin the Proverbs of Solomon.